To enjoy this episode ad-free, please visit patreon.com/forensictales.
Forensic Tales discusses topics that some listeners may find disturbing. The contents of this episode may not be suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised.
In February 2000, 18-year-old college student Michelle O'Keefe was on her way home from appearing in a Kid Rock music video when she was gunned down inside her car. A security guard named Raymond Jennings was eventually arrested and charged with Michelle's murder, and after 3 separate trials, he was sentenced to life in prison. On paper, it seemed like an open and shut case, but the deeper you look, the forensic evidence seems to tell a very different story. So what really happened to Michelle in that parking lot? This is Forensic Tales, episode 333, The Murder of Michelle O'Keefe. Welcome to Forensic Tales. I'm your host, Courtney Fretwell. Forensic Tales is a weekly true crime podcast with a forensic twist. Each episode features real stories highlighting how forensic science was used to uncover the truth. If you enjoy deep dives into real cases and the science behind them, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an episode. And if you want even more content, including monthly full-length bonus episodes, and early ad-free access to over 300 episodes, you can join our community over on Patreon. The support there truly helps keep this show going. To learn more, visit patreon.com/forensictales. And one small favor that makes a huge difference for the show. If you're enjoying Forensic Tales, please consider leaving a positive review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It really helps other listeners discover the podcast. In February 2000, 18-year-old Michelle O'Keefe was just your typical all-American teenager. Born on October 11th, 1981, to parents Patricia and Michael O'Keefe, Michelle grew up in Hanford, California, a city in the south-central San Joaquin Valley of California. She had just started taking college courses and had big dreams about becoming a Hollywood actress someday. And from everything I read about her, she really had a shot at making that happen. By the start of 2000, she was spending a lot of time working down in Los Angeles, picking up small opportunities and getting a feel for the industry she hoped to be a part of. But what should have been just another night in February 2000 would quickly turn into something else entirely. On February 22nd, 2000, Michelle and her friend Jennifer Peterson drove in their separate cars to a park-and-ride lot in the city of Palmdale, just off the 14 freeway. It's one of those parking lots where you can park your car for a few hours or even a few days, carpool somewhere, and not worry about it getting towed. The girls had been invited to be extras in a Kid Rock music video. So, at around 1:45 that afternoon, Michelle and Jennifer arrived at the parking lot. Michelle then parked her new blue 2000 Ford Mustang in the lot and got into Jennifer's car. From there, they drove to the music video set together in Los Angeles. The filming took up most of the afternoon, so the girls weren't back at the parking lot until about 9:20 that night. And from all the reporting I could find, the music video went really, really well, and both Michelle and Jennifer were super excited to be part of it. At 9:23, Michelle used her cell phone to make a quick call from inside her friend's car that lasted about a minute. She then got out of Jennifer's car through the passenger side door and went to the trunk to get her backpack. The backpack contained a pair of pants she planned to change into before going to her college class, which ended at 9:50 p.m. Once she had her things, the girls said their goodbyes, and Michelle headed back to her Mustang while Jennifer drove out of the lot using the southwest exit. That was the last time Jennifer ever saw her friend alive. Right after Jennifer drove away, Michelle moved her car to a darker area of the lot so she could change out of the club attire she wore in the video shoot and into her other outfit. But within just minutes after moving her car, a security guard working for the parking lot reported shots fired over his handheld radio to his supervisor, Iris Malone. That security guard was a man named Raymond Jennings. He was a 25-year-old married father of 4, an Iraq War veteran who was only on his second day working there. As soon as Jennings heard the first shot, he said he ducked down behind a nearby car. Then a few seconds later, he heard several more shots, one after the other. When he finally looked up, he noticed a blue Mustang sitting about 400 feet away in a darker area of the parking lot. He watched as the car slowly rolled backward before coming to a stop with its rear wheels in a planter. From where he was standing, a commuter van partially blocked his view, so he couldn't see who had been inside the car or if anyone had run away from it. Just after the last shots were fired, Jennings radioed his supervisor, reporting that he had heard gunshots. He was then connected to a dispatcher with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. A short time later, his supervisor, Iris Malone, arrived at the parking lot. At first, she didn't see Jennings, but after a minute or two, he came out from behind his own car and approached her vehicle. He then pointed toward the Mustang in the distance, telling her that something wasn't right. Malone told Jennings to get into her car so they could drive over together and check it out, but Jennings refused, saying he was afraid the shooter might still be nearby. Some reports say he was afraid because he was unarmed, so he didn't want to get into a gunfight without something to protect himself. Whatever the case, that will become an important detail for later on. So Malone drove over to the Mustang alone, and as she got closer, she used her headlights and a spotlight to light up the inside of the car. That's when she saw Michelle O'Keefe. She had been shot multiple times. The driver's side door was open, and one of her legs was hanging outside of the vehicle, and it was very clear just by looking at her that there were no signs of life. When deputies from the Los Angeles Sheriff's Office arrived on scene, they found Michelle's body slumped over in the driver's seat. The door was slightly open, and one of her legs was out of the car with her foot on the ground. She had a sandal on her right foot, but her left was bare. Her left arm was on her lap, and her right arm was bent at the elbow with her right hand behind her back. There was a single drop of blood on her left knee and another on the inside of her left ankle. Michelle was still wearing the outfit she wore to the music video, a tube top with a bra underneath and a skirt. She was also still wearing the green wristband she got on set. But part of her tube top had been pulled down, exposing part of her chest. The glove box was open, and her wallet, which held $111 in cash, was found in the gap between the driver's seat and the center console. A cell phone charger was found plugged into the car, but Michelle's phone was nowhere to be found. That's going to become another important detail. Deputies also found an earring stud on the passenger side floor that matched the two Michelle had in her ears. On the outside of the car, they found her left sandal, which had blood on the bottom of it, a fired bullet, 3 expended shell casings from a 9mm gun, and the backing of a yellow metal earring. Based on everything gathered at the scene, the medical examiner determined that while Michelle was outside of her car, she had been struck in the forehead with some type of blunt object. She then got into the car and was shot once in the chest, point blank, and then 3 more times in the neck and face from 2 to 3 feet away. It was those 3 shots that ultimately killed her. The whole murder would have been over within just seconds. Without any other witnesses, surveillance footage, Los Angeles detectives quickly focused on the parking lot's security guard, Raymond Jennings, as their prime suspect. The first time he was interviewed by detectives occurred just hours after the shooting. Here was his story about exactly what happened. He said he was on duty when he heard a car alarm going off. Then moments later, he heard the first gunshot, followed by more. He said he immediately radioed to his supervisor, but never saw anyone else drive out of the parking lot. And because of where he was standing when the gunshots went off, he said he never saw the gunman. But at this point, Jennings was only being treated as a witness, not a suspect. And it's important to mention that when he was first interviewed that night, nothing about his demeanor or behavior seemed unusual. He didn't appear nervous or anxious. Sure, he might have been a little stressed because of what he just witnessed, but he didn't come across as guilty of anything. So he was eventually allowed to leave without deputies ever searching him or his car. 3 days later, on February 25th, Jennings was interviewed again at the parking lot. He told the sergeant who interviewed him that just 1 hour earlier, a red truck with 2 men inside had come to the lot and asked him if he was the security guard on duty at the time of Michelle's murder. He said the whole encounter made him really scared and that he thought his supervisors weren't concerned about his safety. But later that day, Jennings quit his job, not mentioning the concerns he had about his safety to his employer, or that 2 men in a truck had approached him earlier that night. So he told the police that's what happened, but he didn't mention anything to the company he worked for. Then 3 days later, on February 28th, he came back to turn in his uniform, and testing on the uniform would later reveal no bloodstains or gunshot residue. But when investigators heard that he hadn't mentioned the incident involving the red truck to his employer, they became suspicious of him. Why would he only tell the cops that's what happened, but not his company? Detectives started to think maybe he was lying. Maybe he made that story up to say later on that whoever was actually responsible for Michelle's murder was coming back to try and get rid of the only witness from that night. That's yet another important detail you'll want to remember. Someone wanted to know if he might have witnessed the shooting. The next time detectives spoke to Jennings was about a month later, on March 23rd. This time, investigators showed up at his house completely unannounced, but Jennings was more than willing to sit down and speak with them. He was asked if he remembered anything from that night that he hadn't yet shared with them, but once again, Jennings said the same thing he said when he was first interviewed. He said he didn't see anyone or any vehicle leave the lot after the shooting and said the shooter must have run out of there without him seeing anything. But that's when detectives dropped a bombshell. They said a witness had come forward saying she actually spoke to Raymond Jennings right after the shooting took place. The witness was 17-year-old Victoria Richardson. She came forward and said she had been in the parking lot when Michelle was shot. She explained that she, 2 friends, and her 4-year-old godson were in a car she had rented, and they had gone to the lot, as they often did, to smoke marijuana and listen to music. She said that as they sat in the car, someone tried to force open the door, and then she heard some kind of metallic tapping noises, so they decided to leave. But as they drove out, she saw the Mustang in the planter and asked the security guard, who we know was Raymond Jennings, what happened, but he told her he didn't know. So she drove away as the police sirens approached. Victoria Richardson also said that before she left the lot, she saw a man in a late model Toyota Tercel wearing a white t-shirt and a red baseball cap driving out of the parking lot. So when detectives confronted him about that, that's when Jennings kind of changed his story and said he spoke with an African-American woman driving a gray sedan that night, who he now knows was Richardson. But according to him, he didn't remember the brief interaction until they brought it up. But for the investigators, that was a huge red flag. They thought it was very suspicious that he didn't remember speaking to Victoria Richardson, especially after saying on at least 2 occasions that he didn't. However, I find it very interesting that Jennings's supervisor, Iris Malone, also failed to mention Richardson, so it's possible that the detectives framed their questions in a way that led both Jennings and Malone to focus on only certain aspects of what happened that night. During that same interview, Jennings was asked if he owned any firearms. He said yes, he owned a .380 semi-automatic that he had bought and registered while living in North Carolina, but he didn't have it with him the night of Michelle's murder because the security guards there weren't allowed to carry guns. So he said the gun was at home, but detectives weren't done with Raymond Jennings. After that interview, they invited him down to the police station to participate in a cognitive interview, which he agreed to. So on April 7th, he went to a sheriff's facility in Lancaster. During that interview, he was asked things like what he thought the motive for Michelle's murder might be, how he thought the crime occurred, and how she received her injuries. He was also asked personal questions, such as about his military background. Keep in mind, prior to this incident, Raymond Jennings had no prior contact with law enforcement. He didn't have a criminal background or anything. During this interview, Jennings admitted that at first, he thought Michelle might be a sex worker because of how she was dressed from the music video. He also said he thought she might have been sexually assaulted. However, neither of those details proved accurate. But that's when some of Jennings' answers got a little more interesting for detectives. He said he thought the shooter might have shot the ground first before shooting Michelle in the chest and head. That's because when he first approached Michelle's Mustang, he saw several spent shell casings on the ground, along with a single slug. He said he couldn't understand how the slug could have gotten there unless the shooter fired a round into the ground. But that's not all Jennings said. He told detectives that he thought Michelle was shot in the chest first because had she been shot in the head first, she probably wouldn't have been able to back the car up. He thought the chest wound had been fired at close range because he could see powder on Michelle and because of, quote, how it looked. That same day, Jennings agreed to a polygraph test. And here's where things got really bad for him. He was told by the polygraph administrator that he failed because some of his responses indicated deception. However, Jennings would later say he only lied about some of his military background because he was trying to make himself look better. Either way, he failed the polygraph exam, which was yet another win for detectives.
Between diets, workouts, and endless advice, it's hard to know what actually works for weight loss and what's worth your time. That's why hers offers access to an affordable range of FDA-approved GLP-1 medications that now includes the Wegovy pill and the Wegovy pen. Everything is 100% online through hers. You'll connect with a licensed provider who will determine if treatment is right for you. If prescribed, your medication is delivered right to your door, no insurance necessary. Ready to reach your goals? Visit forhers.com/tales to get personalized, affordable care that gets you. That's forhers.com/tales. forhers.com/tales. Weight loss by Hers is not available in all 50 states. Wegovy is the registered trademark of Novo Nordisk AS. To get started and learn more, including important safety information, Wegovy clinical study information, and restrictions, visit forhers.com. Trying to figure out how to get the right mental health treatment can feel overwhelming. Talkiatry helps you move from I know I need the help to actually having a psychiatrist who listens and a clear personalized treatment plan. All 800 plus clinicians are in network with major insurers, so you can use your existing insurance instead of paying monthly subscriptions or out-of-network costs. Getting started just takes a few minutes. Complete a short online assessment, get matched with clinicians who fit your needs, and schedule your first visit in days, not months. And because you continue with the same provider, you're not starting over each visit. Your treatment can evolve with you, so you're actually making progress over time. Head to talkiatry.com/tales and complete the short assessment to get matched with an in-network psychiatrist in just a few minutes. That's talkiatry.com/tales to get matched in minutes.
After that, the two detectives assigned to Michelle's murder went face-to-face with Jennings and told him they think he's the killer. But he denied everything, saying he was completely innocent. Even when the detectives showed him a fake letter from a witness saying she saw Jennings shoot and kill Michelle O'Keefe as a ruse to try to get him to confess, he stuck to his story. He said he was innocent. And although those two detectives suspected him, there just wasn't enough evidence to arrest him. So Raymond Jennings went home. Between those interviews on April 7th, 2000 and 2005, the investigation was at a standstill. And people really want justice for Michelle O'Keefe. Billboards with her picture and the message, "Can you help catch my killer?" popped up around the Antelope Valley. And even the TV show America's Most Wanted featured a segment on her killing. The murder was just so senseless. Why did this even happen? When it came to Jennings, the only person the police really seemed to investigate, there just wasn't enough to go out and arrest him. And although the police received a tip about this possibly being a carjacking gone wrong, no arrests were made during this 5-year time frame. That particular tip suggested the murder might have been committed by two young gang members. The tip also said that gang members were concerned that they had been seen by another witness, a 30-year-old male. But the detectives were never able to corroborate the tip. We'll talk more about that a little later in the episode. There was also no physical or forensic evidence directly linking Jennings to the crime. There was no gunshot residue on his clothes. There had been no transfer of any kind of hair, fibers, or other trace evidence between him and Michelle. And DNA found underneath her fingernails actually excluded him as the source. The blood belonged to an unknown male. Plus, the gun used in the murder was a 9mm, but Jennings didn't own a 9mm. So it's like none of the physical or forensic evidence should have led the cops to his doorstep. About a year and a half after the murder, Michelle's family went on the Montel Williams show and met with a psychic who told them their daughter had been killed by a big man with fair skin. The killer's name, the psychic said, was either Leon or Lee, Jennings' middle name. The case started to gain even more traction after the family hired Rex Paris, a high-powered local litigator, and filed a lawsuit against the city of Palmdale, the security company hired to patrol the parking lot the night of the shooting, and against Jennings personally. Although the lawsuit against Jennings was eventually dismissed, he was questioned under oath as part of that litigation. He had done so without an attorney present and without invoking his Fifth Amendment right to self-incrimination. So in 2005, Michelle's family presented portions of the depositions to prosecutors. They had put together a PowerPoint presentation consisting of edited video clips from Jennings' various police interviews and his civil deposition. Deputy District Attorney Robert Foltz, who years earlier had declined to approve the filing of charges, later told the media that after that meeting he changed his mind. He had previously been quoted as saying, "There is simply insufficient evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Jennings did the killing." But obviously, there had been a change of heart. Here's what the DA told reporters about that, quote, "I can't put my finger on precisely what the difference is, but it was clear we had a fileable case," end quote. So in December of 2005, Jennings was formally charged with second-degree murder with a firearm enhancement. This was now 5 years after Michelle had been killed. At the time, charges were filed. He was serving in Iraq after being called up to active duty. But he was arrested when he returned to California on leave to visit his children. Bail was set at $1 million, which was way more than he could afford. So while his case made its way through the system, he sat in jail, the place he would call home for the next decade. The prosecution theorized that Jennings likely made a sexual advance toward Michelle in the parking lot and killed her after she rejected him. They pointed to the $111 found inside her wallet as proof that it wasn't a robbery. Because of all the media attention this case had received, it was transferred to a court in downtown Los Angeles. The goal was to provide Jennings with the best possible chance at a fair trial. 3 years after his arrest, Raymond went before a Los Angeles County jury for the very first time, but the case ended in a mistrial after they were unable to reach a unanimous verdict. He then went to trial again in February 2009, but another mistrial was declared when the jury was again unable to reach a unanimous verdict. Keep in mind that throughout this entire time, he's still sitting in jail not knowing what his future will look like. He's also still maintaining his innocence. The biggest problem with the state's case is the very topic covered on this podcast, the forensic evidence. There just wasn't any connecting Raymond Jennings to Michelle O'Keefe's murder. DNA found underneath her left ring finger excluded him, but included another unknown male. Ballistic tests confirmed his .380 wasn't the murder weapon. His work uniform, which was returned about 3 days after the murder, was analyzed for blood and gunshot residue, but none was found. And finally, no evidence collected from Michelle's blue Mustang connected him to the crime. There was quite literally zero forensic evidence proving he did this. So both of these juries just couldn't agree on a verdict that could potentially send this man to prison for the rest of his life. But despite the lack of forensic evidence, the prosecution was determined to get a guilty verdict, so they committed to a third criminal trial. He went to trial a third time in December 2009. This time around, it was moved out of downtown Los Angeles to the Superior Court in Lancaster, California, the area where the crime had occurred. But was that a fair move? This had been a case that was highly published in the media, so anyone who lived in this part of Southern California would have heard about it and likely had already formed their opinions on whether Jennings was guilty or not. So without the forensic evidence on their side, the prosecution had to rely on circumstantial evidence, specifically the testimony of Mark Safarik, a former FBI agent who told the jury that he had reviewed the evidence to figure out what happened, why it happened, and what the perpetrator's motive might have been. He was presented as an expert witness in victimology. This FBI agent told the jury there was no evidence to support any theory that an acquaintance committed the crime, because no one other than her friend knew of Michelle's decision to park at that lot. He said the crime was probably committed by someone who happened to be there. He said that a scenario where someone was lurking in the lot, waiting for a victim, quote, stretches credibility. He also ruled out someone following her from the music video filming and discarded any idea that it was a gang-related crime because he believed it was committed by a person acting alone. In the eyes of the jury, this was very powerful testimony. Not only was he presented as a very credible FBI agent, a position that many people inherently respect, but he was also regarded as an expert witness. And in many trials, the testimony of expert witnesses can be very powerful. A ballistics expert testified that the ammunition used in the shooting was a combination of different types made by different manufacturers. According to this expert, that detail supported the prosecution's theory that Jennings's military training provided him with the skill and knowledge to combine different types of bullets to achieve an even greater degree of damage. So this was the state's way of challenging the fact that Jennings didn't own a 9mm, but he still could have committed the crime. The prosecution argued that Jennings knew details about the crime that only the killer would know, like the type of gun used, the order of the shots, and specific details about Michelle's injuries. They also pointed to statements he made about seeing signs of life, suggesting he could have only seen that during the shooting itself. That stemmed from an earlier police interview when he apparently said he could see a pulse in Michelle's neck. Second, they claimed Jennings acted suspiciously. They said he didn't tell the full truth about what he saw that night, and they focused heavily on the fact that he refused to immediately go with his supervisor to check on Michelle's car. Remember, he apparently said he didn't want to because he was unarmed. But now, the prosecution is using that against him. And finally, they presented a theory of motive. With no signs of robbery or carjacking, an FBI profiler suggested this may have started as an attempted sexual assault that escalated into murder, and that Jennings, as a security guard, would have had the opportunity to approach Michelle without raising alarm. So taken together, prosecutors argued that while no single piece of evidence proved guilt, all of it pointed to one person. The defense's theory was that this was a botched robbery. They specifically pointed to the fact that Michelle's cell phone was missing and her glove compartment had clearly been ransacked. So their theory is that she was killed during a botched robbery, possibly by gang members. If you recall from earlier, the police had received a tip about this possibly being gang-related. But that theory wasn't enough to convince a jury of Raymond Jennings' peers. I guess they say the third time's a charm because on December 18th, 2009, a week before Christmas, he was found guilty of second-degree murder. And at a separate hearing, he was sentenced to 40 years to life in prison. Even up until that point, he maintained his innocence, saying at his sentencing hearing, "This is one sin that I will not be judged for. I'm at peace in my life and I laugh and I smile because I hold no remorse." End quote. He also spoke directly to Michelle's family, saying, "When the real killer is found, I forgive you for the insults that you said about my children and my parents. I forgive you for the hateful words that you have said." Many of Michelle's family members also spoke and quoted the Bible. When Michelle's younger brother Jason spoke, he read from the 8th chapter of John. "If a man is a murderer and he doesn't repent," he read, "you belong to your father, the devil." Despite there not being an ounce of forensic evidence, he was still convicted of the worst possible crime. In 2013, Jennings filed a state law petition for a writ of habeas corpus on his own, without a lawyer. He also appealed to the California Supreme Court, which is the highest court in the state. But before the petition could be heard, the case caught the attention of a father-son lawyer duo. While surfing the internet, Clint Ehrlich, who was only a law student at the time, came across a link to a 2010 NBC Dateline program about the case, titled "The Girl in the Blue Mustang." And after watching the episode, he stayed up all night looking up any and every detail he could find about the case. There was just something about the story that troubled him. How could this man be sentenced to prison without any cold, hard evidence? So the next morning, he went to his dad, Jeffrey Ehrlich, who was a very well-known and influential attorney. And by the next day, he had convinced his father to take the case and represent Jennings free of charge. Among other points, Ehrlich's main arguments in his 34-page letter to the district attorney's conviction review unit were that, number one, if Jennings had committed the crime in the way the prosecution said, there should have been physical evidence. First, if he had shot Michelle, he should have had gunshot residue on him. The prosecution tried to claim that he washed it off, but the crime lab's notes stated that his work uniform was worn and dirty when collected and didn't appear to have been washed. Second, if he had fired a shot into the ground at his feet, as the prosecution claimed he had, there would have been evidence of what's known as pseudo-stippling on his pants. In other words, he should have had bullet and pavement fragments on his clothing, but there were none. It's also important to mention that none of this information was presented to the jury at his third trial. Number two, the gun. The prosecution never offered any evidence suggesting Jennings owned or had access to a 9mm, the kind of weapon used to kill Michelle. And why would he bring a weapon like that to work? As a security guard for that particular lot, they were prohibited from bringing guns. And even if he had, for his own protection, the only gun he owned wasn't a 9mm. Number three, Jennings wasn't the only person in the lot that night. He's also not the only suspect, nor the most likely. The heart of the prosecution's case was that Jennings was the only one there that night, so he had to be the one to shoot and kill Michelle. But that's just not true. The prosecution knew of at least a few others who were there that night, including Victoria Richardson. Remember, she was the one from earlier who said she was inside that parking lot that night, smoking marijuana and listening to music with her two friends. She had even spoken to Jennings just minutes after the shooting. She also told detectives that she saw a man in a red baseball cap leave the scene just before she did. According to attorney Jeffrey Ehrlich, the reason why the state may not have believed her is that she had obvious credibility issues. She was a known gang member, and despite only being 17, she had a pretty lengthy criminal record, which included several violent crimes and drug deals. She was even in prison at the time of Jennings' third criminal trial. There was also Richardson's boyfriend at the time, 18-year-old Andrew Stewart, who was also a Bloods gang member. After Michelle's murder, Stewart is believed to have committed a series of home invasions and carjackings, including the gunpoint theft of a Ford Mustang, for which he was sentenced to 31 years in prison. When he was arrested for that particular crime, he was apparently wearing an earring that matched one of Michelle's, and was found to have been missing from her body. He was also known to commit crimes with his 9mm gun, the same kind of weapon used in this case. However, I want to be crystal clear with all my listeners that Andrew Stewart has never been charged with a crime connected to Michelle's murder, so he's presumed completely innocent, and I'm not making any claims to the contrary. And finally, number 4. Jennings didn't have any special knowledge about Michelle's murder, like they tried to say at trial. Pretty much, that entire argument stems from the 8-hour cognitive interview Jennings underwent about a month after the shooting. The very purpose of this type of interview is to get the witness's opinion and try to jog their memory. So whatever he said during that interview was then turned against him. What the prosecution didn't tell the jury was that Jennings also got a lot of details just flat out wrong during this interview. He incorrectly thought that Michelle had been shot in the forehead when, in reality, she'd been hit in the head with some type of heavy object. He thought he saw brain matter in the car interior, but there was none. And he was wrong about seeing Michelle's hands twitch or a pulse on her neck. The forensic evidence suggests she died instantly from the head and neck wounds, and there wouldn't have been a pulse or twitching. After reviewing the letter from Jennings's attorney, the district attorney assigned to the conviction review unit told a judge the office now believed someone else had committed the crime. There was just no physical or forensic evidence linking him to the shooting. In fact, the forensics actually seemed to exonerate him. And the real motive behind the killing might be connected to gangs. That seemed to be a winning argument because in June 2016, a Los Angeles County judge ordered Jennings released with an ankle monitor. Then, on January 23, 2017, that same judge granted the habeas petition, vacated Jennings's conviction, and found him factually innocent. This meant that after spending 11 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit, he was finally allowed to go home to his family. Not only was this huge for Raymond Jennings, but it was also huge for the criminal justice system as a whole. For someone to be declared factually innocent, that's a massive burden to overcome. Following the court's decision, prosecutors formally dismissed the charges. But that shouldn't be the end of this story. For starters, that means the real killer, the person responsible for taking Michelle O'Keefe's life, is still out there somewhere. Whether they're in prison for an unrelated crime or they're walking the streets. Her killer is still out there and needs to be held accountable for what happened in that parking lot that night, all those years ago. The biggest piece to that puzzle may be in identifying the unknown male DNA found underneath her fingernails. If we can identify that person, we might know exactly who our suspect is. Second, Raymond Jennings' life. He lost 11 years of his life sitting in prison for a crime he was declared factually innocent of. It's scary to think that our system can convict someone of murder when all the forensic evidence seems to point away from him. We still don't know whose DNA was found underneath Michelle's fingernails. All we know is that it excludes Jennings. We also don't know where the 9mm gun used in the murder is. All we know is that Jennings didn't own that particular weapon. Not a shred of forensic evidence supports his conviction. And yet, it still happened. We want our criminal justice system to work for the worst of us, so it can work for the best of us. According to an article by Jennings's appellate attorney, Jeffrey Elrick, an article I used a lot for this episode, Jennings was released from prison with $4 to his name. He'll never get that time he spent in prison back. He was simply a witness to a crime who found himself at the center as a suspect. In March 2017, the state of California awarded Jennings $538,440 in compensation. I'll let you be the judge on whether that amount is enough. In cases like this, we're taught to trust the evidence, the DNA, the ballistics, the trace evidence left behind at a crime scene. Because forensic evidence doesn't have a motive, it doesn't get emotional, and it doesn't try to tell a story. It simply tells the truth. And in Michelle O'Keefe's case, that truth was never pointing to Raymond Jennings. Not the DNA, not the gun, not the physical evidence at the scene. And yet, he was still convicted. Which raises a much bigger question. If someone can be found guilty of murder without a single piece of forensic evidence tying them to the crime, then what exactly are we relying on? Because while the system eventually corrected itself in this case, it took 11 years. 11 years of someone's life gone. And at the center of all of this is still an unanswered question. Who killed Michelle O'Keefe? Because the truth is, the forensic evidence didn't just fail to prove guilt, it may have been pointing us in another direction the entire time, a direction that, even now, remains unresolved. Forensic Tales is a Rockefeller audio production. The show is written and produced by me, Courtney Fretwell. If you'd like to support the show and help fund research, production, and editing, you can do so with a small monthly contribution on Patreon. Patreon supporters get early access to ad-free episodes and exclusive bonus content. You can learn more at patreon.com/Forensic Tales. And if you enjoy the show, leaving a positive rating or review really helps others discover it. For a full list of sources used in this episode, visit forensictales.com. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings.